There was a time when Maajid Nawaz was an Islamic extremist. After an arrest and soul-searching time, he emerged reformed. Joining us now for more on his journey, Maajid Nawaz, author of Islam and the Future of Tolerance. He's also the chairman of Quilliam, a think tank that challenges the narratives of extremism. And we welcome you to this side of the pond from your home in the United Kingdom.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Can we show you a very funny picture to start with? You want to put this up, please?
Look
on the monitor up there.
Oh my God, someone's done their research.
That's you on the right, decked out in your hip-hop gear.
Yeah.
You're a bit of a bad boy back then, growing up in Essex, southeast England. And as you put it in your memoir, from hip-hop loving teenager in Essex to traveling to 4 different countries to seed my divisive Islamist message, casting America as the enemy of, quote, my people. Fusing faith with fury, I dedicated my entire youth to awakening what we call the sleeping giant, rousing the world's 1.5 billion Muslims against the USA.
Yeah.
What did joining a radical Islamist group do for you personally as a kid?
What it did for me on a personal level was give me a sense of identity, a sense of belonging where I hadn't felt that I belonged in Essex, where I was born and raised, a sense of empowerment. In many instances, these are false senses, of course. Identity is by its very nature, it's complex, it's multiple. It should be, and it must be multiple. But I, as an angry young 16-year-old, took a very simplistic view on identity and considered myself exclusively a Muslim and nothing else. Or this false sense of empowerment. Feeling like anger and hate and bitterness towards others is empowering, is a false sense of empowerment, but nevertheless was meaningful to me as a 16-year-old. In many ways, my journey through Islamism has, there are some lessons that I still keep with me today. I spent a lot of time having to convince people of ideas that were inherently difficult to convince people of. And so a lot of that training has remained with me till today as well.
Why was there nothing scary about Islamism at the time that didn't deter you from diving in deeper?
So let's keep in mind that we're talking now here, when I joined the revolutionary Islamist group I did, it was 1993, or 2 or 3 roughly, or 4. Those early 90 years.
So we're well before the Twin Towers and all of that
we're
business.
well before Al-Qaeda. What we're looking at is, in fact, Rambo going to Afghanistan, calling the Mujahideen heroes because they're fighting the Soviet Union. What we're looking at are British Muslims joining British armed forces in Bosnia to defend Bosnian Muslims from the Serbian perpetuated genocide. So individual fighters who are non-state actors were freely able to go abroad and fight and return, and they were hailed as heroes. So to set that context and that scene, it was a very different time to what we found with the formation of Al-Qaeda and the 9/11 attacks afterwards.
But the religious obligations of Islamism, were you not deterred by any of that?
I had never been religious, and I found, to be honest with you, I found that the most difficult part, because as you've alluded to in my book, the first section of which is called B-Boy, I had an interesting lifestyle prior to joining Hizb ut-Tahrir, and I had to give up a lot of things. And to my eternal regret, one of the biggest mistakes I made is I gave away an incredibly rare collection of hip-hop vinyl, which you can't get your hands on these days, and I gave it away for free. And if I ever find the person to whom I gave that to, I'm going to demand it back.
You want it back?
I desperately want it back. Yeah.
What was the radical group that you joined? I'm not going to say it well, but Hizb ut-Tahrir?
Hizb ut-Tahrir, you can call it HT as a short for the acronym.
HT.
Yeah.
Did you have a particular role in this group?
I joined as a recruit, but I eventually ended up on the leadership committee of this organization and was responsible for exporting and founding franchises from Britain in Pakistan, in Denmark, and eventually in Egypt.
Okay, Egypt. You ended up in prison in Egypt.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I arrived, so fast forward from me joining 10 years later, I arrived in Egypt ostensibly for my studies. I was studying law and Arabic at the University of London.
There's a picture of you.
That's right, that's my mugshot, actually, in Mazra'atora prison in Cairo. And I arrived in Egypt one day before the 9/11 attacks. And of course, the entire world changed after then. I wasn't prepared for the way in which the security climate would change. So 10 months roughly after my arrival, I was arrested by the Egyptian state security. I was blindfolded. I had my hands tied behind my back with rags. And I was taken to their dungeons in Cairo, in a building known as Al-Gihaz, where they began torturing everyone via electrocution.
If you don't want to, it's okay, but do you want to be more specific about what they did to you then?
So I got away without being electrocuted. What they did instead, as aside from the beatings, which were nothing in comparison to what they were doing to others. They were torturing people by electrocuting their teeth and their genitalia, and they were forcing me to watch that and then asking me questions off the back of that. And the reason I got away is still a mystery to me, because it wasn't because I was British. They tortured a British citizen, my fellow inmate, in front of me, and you know, played our questions off each other. So they had actually, they threatened me. They said, we will do the same to you in within 12 hours if you don't confess to everything. Confess to what? Coming to Egypt to work for HT, my organization, and working to resurrect a caliphate in Egypt. Neither of which were actually your goals, I'm gathering. Well, I was actually recruiting for the organization, but I wasn't there in Egypt for that purpose. But within the 12 hours, the embassy had intervened, and this is 4 days later. But the 12-hour window they'd given me, within that, the embassy intervened and got us out of the torture dungeons and into solitary confinement, where we spent the next 4 months. Eventually, we were sentenced to 5 years in Mazar Torah prison, which is where that mugshot was taken that you showed on the screen. How old were you at the time? 24 years old. Did you think you were going to die? Yes. And then comes George Orwell's Animal Farm. Indeed. How did that influence your life at this moment? You see, Orwell's genius is, I think, it's yet to be matched in the way in which he takes, or took, writing and political subjects, and was able to write through fiction, really meaningful and timeless works. If you look at 1984 today, and if you look at Animal Farm today, you change the theme from communism to jihadist terrorism, and it's the same thing. How I felt I was living in Egypt, in prison, I felt I was living in the jihadist equivalent of Orwell's Animal Farm. You know, the pigs had started walking on hind legs, and they were running the show. In that block, the cell block we were in, the jihadists were running the show. And it was the first time I'd come up close and lived with, in proximity to, those whom I had lionized growing up, people I considered heroes. And I was finally living with them. And I came to see their mannerisms, their behavior, their ideas up close and implemented on the rest of their cellmates in that cell block. And I came to the conclusion, and this is long before ISIS declared the so-called caliphate, I came to the conclusion, if these people ever come to power, it will be hell on earth. We were having conversations about slavery and its legitimacy, debates around amputation of limbs and stoning adulteresses. And in a way, I really didn't want to live in that type of place. And so when I finished my sentence and I was released from prison, I not only left Hizb ut-Tahrir, but I decided to dedicate the rest of my time and energies in challenging what I now consider and call the Islamist ideology as distinct from Islam, the faith. As you look at yourself now, you are an elegantly dressed man. It's very kind of you to say. Well, I'm just telling it like it is. Idris Elba should be worried. Yes. The next James Bond. Yeah. Do you sometimes look back and say, what was I thinking then? Or do you ever put yourself in the headspace of the young teenager and think, look at what I have turned into now. I never would have seen that coming either. Well, I certainly wouldn't have seen any of this coming. Though in a sense, there's a continuum throughout my entire life. Even though in Radical, in the book, there are 3 sections, B-Boy, and Islamist, and then the 3rd section I call Radical, which is how I describe myself now. Though they are 3 very different lives, and the book begins with that contrast, basically contrasting 3 very different scenes from my life, it could look as if they are 3 different people. But actually, there is a strand that runs through consistently throughout my life. One is an anger at injustice and a desire to speak out against it. What's changed is my understanding of what injustice is. My understanding that, in fact, the Nietzschean beast that we were trying to fight, you know, we became that beast ourselves as Islamists. And my desire to speak out against injustice, as well as applying to the Guantanamos of this world and of extraordinary rendition and torture and profiling, has now extended also to the Islamist ideology. So in that sense, there's a continuing strand. And also, actually, from the picture you showed of me when I was young, my love for, let's just put it this way, fashion tastes back then, wearing red bandanas and red click suits, I mean, that's continued throughout as well. So I think there are some, you know, and my love for music is still there as well. Islam and the Future of Tolerance, that's the upcoming book, dialogue between you and Sam Harris, the well-known atheist. Why don't we start with this? How would you characterize the kind of conversation that the 2 of you are having in this book? A dialogue is the best word for it, and it's respectful, it's civil. We take some very, very tricky subjects. You know, if you ever go to dinner They say never, on the dinner table, never discuss religion or politics.
And you do both.
And it's our job to do both. I mean, this is actually everything I do is discuss religion and politics. And so it's very difficult to have that conversation in a way that doesn't anger some of the people all of the time. And so the beautiful thing with this particular conversation is it remained civil. And there were certain moments where it could have turned into something else. Sometimes he was pushing my buttons on something, or I was pushing his buttons.
Well, let me pick one.
Yeah.
There's a moment where you say Islam is a religion of peace, and he thinks, well, not exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so my view, actually, I come to that conclusion, but not because I think Islam is inherently a religion of peace. I think Islam is a religion. And I think that actually, like all religions and any religion, it can be interpreted to be anything the follower, the Muslim, wants it to be. The reason I therefore say that by definition today, if that holds true, it has to be a religion of peace is simply because the vast majority of Muslims are not jihadists. If the vast majority of Muslims were jihadists, I'd be forced to conclude it's a religion of war. So it's actually, I define Islam by what its people hold it to be. And that's slightly different to saying it is in essence a religion of peace. And the disagreement that Sam and I began with is that he was saying in essence it's a warlike religion in origin. I think through our dialogue he shifted his position to where I am. I think that's something he has, that we just had a public discussion around the book at Harvard University. And he kicked off with that point and said, actually my views have been moderated since this dialogue with Maajid.
So you moved him a bit towards your view on that. What did he move you towards?
I have, in the last 5 years, both in my dialogues with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Sam Harris, I have developed a lot of clarity on some of those issues around what is represented by a maxim I came up with eventually. And that maxim is that no idea is above scrutiny and no people should be beneath dignity. And what I mean by that is we must jealously guard our freedom to challenge and to scrutinize and to even satirize any idea. And a religion is an idea like any other. Now, that's very different to picking individually on Muslims, attacking a Muslim woman for wearing a headscarf or a man for having a beard. That's anti-Muslim bigotry. And so Muslims as a people must remain dignified, and we must preserve the dignity of Muslims. But that's very different, as I said, to scrutinizing ideas. And I've developed that clarity and that distinction between those two over the last 5 years through my dialogues with people like Ayaan and Sam Harris.
Look at the monitor over my shoulder because we're going to play a clip from an interview I did in the past with Ali Al-Rizvi. You and Harris both mentioned him in the book.
Yeah.
This was on a program we did this past spring on interpreting the Quran. Let's roll the clip, please.
There's this quote that I have that I like to say when I talk to a lot of sort of progressive and moderate people who want to reinterpret the Quran in a way, and that is, put down the Quran and listen to me. And that's the idea that a lot of the interpreters, for instance, who are all supposed to be fallible, they're all humans, they will often they'll like do anything, just don't read the Quran literally. Like the words of God, the way that they're written, just don't read them that way. And I understand why they do that, because in a lot of ways it's terrifying. And that is what a lot of these militant groups are quoting. You can't say that's not Islamic.
Don't read the Quran literally, yes or no?
Yeah, no, absolutely don't read it literally. I've got a lot of respect for Ali, in fact. And on this point of whether, the question, I think the deeper point there he was making, and he and Sam are of like mind on this, is whether the literal reading of the Quran is the violent reading, and whether moderates are engaged in a pretense, which ultimately they have to be engaged in, to push forward a peaceful interpretation, and that they encourage that peaceful interpretation, but they want frank candor in admitting that it's not a correct interpretation. And I have a slightly adjusted view to that. I don't think there is a correct interpretation, and that I think it's as wrong to say that Islam is inherently peaceful as it is to say it's inherently violent. I think it's a bunch of texts like the US Constitution. And if you take the analogy of the US Constitution, there are people that argue that for abortion rights, from the same document, people that argue for the rights of life.
Yeah, but they're looking for meaning in something that isn't specific about that issue.
Yeah.
Volume 9, Book 84, number 57, in the Hadith, it says, whoever changes his religion,
kill him.
Kill him, right.
Right.
I mean, there's really no room for misinterpretation there in the way that there might be around abortion rights. So how do you deal with that?
Well, actually, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation there, and there's been a lot of misinterpretation there. Now, what I'm not saying is that what you've just read is an implausible interpretation. It's actually a very plausible interpretation to read that hadith and say it means kill apostates. And lots of Muslims do kill apostates. And in fact, there's a huge problem with apostasy laws across Muslim majority countries.
What other interpretation would you come to?
So when you take that hadith, the problem is about methodology, which is what the dialogue with Sam is about, is looking at that hadith without even bringing in other passages right now. The hadith in itself is illogical. Now, hadith as a source is the second source in Islam. The reason this hadith is illogical is this: whoever changes his religion, kill him, would automatically also apply to
if you convert to Islam.
Yeah, if you become a Muslim from being a Christian, you've changed your religion. So the hadith on the face of it is against conversion, full stop, either way, which is why it's illogical. And so now we have that problem. Now we have a problem which is actually, if you're going to be literalist about it, I will push your literalism one stage further and say, follow me in that literalism and accept that the hadith doesn't say either one. It's actually an inherently contradictory hadith. Now we have a problem of what do we do with a hadith that on its own doesn't make sense. And this is where interpretive methodologies come along. And we have to say, okay, we have to couch this with other supporting references and passages. Now, that's where methodology kicks in. Which passages do you bring in to support it? I would say, as somebody that doesn't want to kill anyone, I would say bring in the one that says, La ikraha fi din, from the Quran itself. No compulsion in religion. To say, you know, we've got to temper this hadith with another. Others, like the jihadists, would say, no, we're going to bring in the other, you know, something about jihad and violence. And this is where it's, you know, to understand that is a bit like, I'm legally trained, so it's like you take the English common law. You can pull something out, but ultimately it contradicts something else in that very same source that has the very same level of authority. And so to reconcile those things in a process in Arabic which is called jamma, the reconciliation of religious scripture, is where the methodology kicks in. And that's why the dialogue I have with Sam is all about methodology. And I want to finish this point by saying one thing. A lot of people say terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. And this is where I agree with Ali. It's incorrect to say terrorist violence perpetrated by Muslims has nothing to do with Islam. Of course, they are citing plausible readings of scripture. It's also as incorrect to say it has everything to do with Islam. That's the other end of the extreme. I think a frank and honest approach to this would be to say that it has something to do with Islam. Not everything, but something. And not nothing, but something. And that something is the fact that these jihadist terrorists do resort to a plausible reading of scripture. And the counter-narrative to that plausible reading isn't as strong as theirs. And part of the solution, yes, foreign policy is part of the solution. Yes, identity crises are part of the solution that need to be addressed. Also part of the solution is ideology and challenging their interpretation.
Which takes us full circle to where I want to end off, which is you've now made it your life's mission to fight Islamic extremism. How do you do that?
There are two ways people have tried to do it so far, and both have been, I believe, have been counterproductive. I call that the law and war approach. No amount of war is going to solve what is essentially an ideological challenge. We can't shoot our way out of this problem, and we've tried. In fact, President Obama tried even more so than Bush. Drone strikes under Obama increased rather than decreased. Guantanamo remained. Bin Laden was assassinated. So we tried to shoot our way out of this problem, and jihadism metastasized. ISIS emerged. That's not a solution. Similarly, we cannot legislate our way out of this problem, because if it is an ideological problem, you can't just make ideas disappear by banning them. So if we understand the nature of the problem, the only thing that I believe in the long term is going to work is a civil society struggle to redefine the social contract in Muslim majority societies to one of small L, liberal, democratic values. And that's going to require social movements of young Arabs and young Muslims challenging the Islamist narrative and advocating democratic values and actually literally preaching those democratic values.
That could take 100 years.
It could take probably 50 years. I don't know why I say 50. Let's not forget that roughly 50 years ago, the Nazis had taken over Germany, and the world had seen one of the worst wars in our entire history of humanity. And look at Germany today, receiving 400,000 refugees? 100,000?
Double that.
Yeah, so 800,000 refugees. Yeah. I mean, there's a huge difference in German culture. And that happened within a very short space of time,
relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maajid, it's awfully good of you to be with us here today at TVO. You've given us a heck of a lot to think about, and we wish you well with your Quilliam Foundation and your new book, Islam and the Future of Tolerance. Thanks so much.
Delighted. Thank you very much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.